again. Okay, there we go. All right. Okay. Hello, and welcome to the Sonic Cinema Movie Chat. My name is Brian Scuttle. You can follow me online at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema Podcast, which is on Apple, Google, and Spotify podcasts, as well as the YouTube channel, where I also include little quick takes on reviews in addition to interviews and the podcast itself. And that is the Sonic Cinema Podcast on YouTube. And you can also join us on twitch.tv /Scuttle on going to keep it consistent on Mondays and Thursdays with me going back to work. We'll see how that goes. But thank you very much for joining me tonight. And with the completion of the Atlanta Film Festival this past Sunday, although if you are interested in any of the films at the Atlanta Film Festival, the virtual catalog is actually available still through Mother's Day. So if you go to the Atlanta Film Festival website, go to the film guide. They've got some really great selections at the virtual catalog that are available through Sunday if you want to check those out. I want to talk on the stream for this episode and then the next one on film festivals from different perspectives. And tonight I want to talk about it primarily from the critical perspective, which is to say the idea of covering the film festival. And I'm pleased to be joined by Scott Phillips, who is a fellow critic of the Georgia Film Critics Association, and he agreed to join me on this podcast to talk about film festivals. Thank you very much for joining me, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to see you and meet you virtually, at least.
So, before we get into film festivals, though, how did you get into writing about movies?
You know, the interesting thing, or at least interesting to me, how life kind of comes full circle, is I started out. I went to the University of Georgia, and I was in their journalism school, and I went to the student newspaper and said, "What can I do?" And of course, everybody, it seems back then, which was the late '80s, everybody wanted sports. Everybody wanted to be on the sideline at the football games and all that kind of stuff. And they were like, "Well, we could use an entertainment reporter." Or a critic. And so I was like, "Oh, well, what does that involve?" And they were like, "Well, you get some free passes to go to the movies, and then you come back and you write about them." And I was like, "Oh, well, cool. That sounds great." Because I was a movie freak to begin with. So that just played right into that passion. But oddly enough, my student editor was Jim Farmer, who is still a film critic to this day and an entertainment writer in the Atlanta area. He's a member of a couple of the critics groups that I'm in. And so I don't know that he remembers me because he was the upperclassman and I was the underclassman. But I started writing film reviews for the Red and Black student newspaper. I actually have a couple of them. When people ask me, what was the very first film that you reviewed? The answer was Wes Craven's The Serpent and the Rainbow. I saw that in theaters and reviewed that for the Red and Black. So that is when it began. And then, like with most people, it totally changed when everything went online. And it started out more just writing for a website that was run by a friend of mine. And then hopping from that website to another website to a slightly bigger website. And so now I've landed at WRBL, which is a CBS affiliate here in Columbus. And so I do, film reviews and film journalism for WRBL.com.
Okay. What were some of the movies that drew you to an appreciation of movies first and foremost?
Yeah, I'm aging myself here when I can tell you what I saw in the theater. I don't know if you can see all the silver in my hair on this Zoom. I'll pretend that it's still blonde like it was 30 years ago. But I was, let's see, how old was I? I was 8 when I saw Star Wars in the theaters, the original.
Mhm.
I still just call it Star Wars. I've never gotten used to calling it A New Hope.
Yeah.
When I stood in lines around the block, and all that footage you see from the 70s when it opened, and you see people lined up around the block. Well, me and my dad were a couple of those people. I
Mhm.
saw Jaws in the theater on its original theatrical run, and it scared me so bad that when we went on family trips to the beach, I stayed in the pool. uh, and uh, and I actually saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind in theaters when it was first released, but I was so young, it was mostly lost on me. I remember seeing some of it, but I certainly didn't get all of the themes and everything that it has going on. But I always tell everybody, my mom was the movie fan. My mom knew every old movie. If it was Cary Grant, Doris Day, whoever might be in it, my mom could watch one scene and go, "Oh, that's whatever,"
Mhm.
and name the film. And my dad was always a really good writer, so I always tell people that my combination for film journalism was my mom taught me a love of movies and movies throughout the years, and my dad kind of taught me how to write, at least I
Mhm.
hope. But along the way, I mean, when I was in college, I got a chance to see Goodfellas, of course, in theaters. And Scorsese just totally, flipped my lid with those movies. I'm a big fan of Michael Mann.
Mhm.
It's strange. I'll just tell you one really quick kind of anecdotal kind of little story here, and then we can talk about something else. But I was a high schooler living in Auburn, Alabama, where Auburn University is, when Manhunter came out.
Mhm.
And I was a huge fan of Miami Vice. I was dying to see Manhunter, but our theaters in Auburn didn't have it.
Yeah.
So it was playing in Columbus, Georgia, which is only 45 miles away from where I was growing up. And so my parents, because I could drive at that point, actually let me drive to Columbus on my own. I sat in a theater with about 3 other people and watched Manhunter. And then all these years later, I am living in the very town that I drove to see that film, and drove by that theater almost every day for years. So that was kind of my commitment level to seeing certain movies. I was a little, film freak even when I was in the middle of high school.
Well, I think so. One of the things that I want to talk about tonight is film festivals, and I know my first film festival experience was as a fan.
Sure.
Went to Birmingham for the Sidewalk Film Festival in 2002, and they were showing a screening of Chance, written directed by Amber Benson from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, who was interested in at that time, and it was a really great experience. My next real film festival experience, though, wasn't until I started covering the Atlanta Film Festival in 2019. What was your first experience covering film festivals, or even just going to film festivals?
It was it probably would have been Atlanta many a moon ago. I don't even know that I could tell
Mhm.
you what year was the first year that I went to the Atlanta Film Festival, but it was, after I got deeper into film criticism and deeper into covering movies and everything, that I really kind of broadened what I went to. And so I would say it's been probably, really honestly, within about the last 6, 7 years
Okay.
that I've started avidly going to lots of film festivals in the course of a year. And so I've been to the True False Film Festival in Columbia, Missouri, which is the biggest documentary film festival in the U.S. The Chattanooga Film Festival, great regional film festival there, lots of good genre stuff. the Atlanta Film Festival, Macon Film Festival. I've been to the Overlook Festival, not when it was originally done out in Colorado, but now that they've been meeting in New Orleans, I've gone to that for a couple of years. I go to Austin for Fantastic Fest a number of times. And then, of course, you, just like me, have had access to some festivals that we might not have had the time to travel to virtually during the pandemic. And so that's added quite a few festivals to my roster, but not ones that I physically went to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's really been strange. Like we were talking before we started the stream here that you and I both covered Sundance this year, which was
Right.
largely virtual. I mean, I know the Plaza had some drive-ins, but I didn't end up going to them just because of the fact that the schedule didn't really line up for any of them. So it was all virtual, and I think that is probably one of the most challenging festivals I've ever covered because at a certain point you worry. I know I kind of worried that I was oversaturating myself with trying to get to as
Yeah.
many movies as
Yeah. Yeah,
possible.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I call that festival brain. And so I will tell people, they'll bring up a movie and it may have been the midnight movie on day 5 of a festival that I went to, and they'll be like, "Oh, what did you think of X film?" And I'll be like, "Well, I think I really, really liked it, but I may have been so kind of punch drunk at that point that maybe I wasn't very critical at the moment." And so some of those movies, I almost like to rewatch them and see,
Yeah.
do they really strike me like they struck me when it was movie 25 of a film festival on day 4 or 5? Because at some point you almost start grading on a curve, especially if you've seen
Yeah.
some things that are kind of bad. Then when you see something that's halfway good, it looks like a masterpiece because you've seen so many that weren't so great. So, but and that changes, of course, kind of with the level of curation. I mean, there's some film festivals I go to that it feels like most things are ranging from good to great, and you don't see too many things that are bad.
Yeah.
But I know exactly what you mean. Sundance was, doing it virtually, where you didn't have to stand in lines, you didn't have to go find food, you didn't have to
Mm.
go, worry about parking or all the different headaches that come with going to a festival. You're just sitting there binging. I call it chain smoking movies. You're just sitting there lighting one off the other. You can really consume a bunch of films and kind of wind up foggy headed by the end of it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the more underappreciated aspects of live film festivals, where you basically have to force yourself to build breaks into your schedule. Like
Exactly.
you can still try to get
Yep.
to like 4 or 5 movies in a in an in-person film festival, but at some point you need to eat. You need to just take
Yes.
a break,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that's something that I was covering Fantasia Fest last year and then Sundance this year. I mean, Fantasia Fest was a different beast because it was in geo block, so I mean, basically, it was just working off of press screeners.
Right.
But with Sundance, it was one of those things where it's like, oh, somebody would talk about one movie that I happened to miss. Oh, hey, I'll catch that in the second screening before my
Right.
schedule starts the next day.
Right.
And it was just absolute madness. I mean, I did like the flexibility in how you didn't have to start it right on time, but at the same time, that almost makes you tempted to maybe sneak 1 or 2 more movies in there.
Exactly. How can I pit these windows of opportunity against one another so that I can see all of it? But yeah, like the first year, I went to the very first Chattanooga Film Festival. And
Mm,
I thought it was the greatest thing that had ever happened to me, logistically speaking, because at the time they've changed venues since, but at the time they were using like what was their local Carmike Cinema before Carmike sold. And
Yeah.
so they were using the kind of the back half of the Carmike Cinema, but in the parking lot, which the back half opened into, right across the parking lot was a Five Guys Burgers. Right across the other side of the parking lot, I think, was a Mexican restaurant. And so literally you could see a movie, and within the break time, like about 30 minutes maybe between offerings, you could run over to Five Guys and eat, or you could run over to the Mexican restaurant and eat, and you could run right back and virtually not miss a movie
Yeah.
eating. And so I remember thinking, wow, this is the greatest. I don't have to worry. Parking was well organized, and food was readily accessible. And so I thought, man, this is the greatest. And so that was kind of almost at the head of the class there for me for a while, just because the logistics were so easy. Because
Mhm.
some of these festivals you're talking about with your Sundances and stuff like that, you can miss a movie standing in line for the movie that you want to see.
Yeah.
And so just the logistics of doing the festival trims you down to a few films a day, if you're being choosy about what you see.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean that is, to a certain extent, it's like it's a good thing that in-person film festivals do that, because of the fact that some film festivals are like that, because of, in terms of the location, because you do have to build in a certain amount of discipline as far as what you see, how much you can see in a given day, but at the same time, you also are less likely to be able to catch up with that movie later.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things where something like, something like the Atlanta Film Festival this year and last year, really, where it was basically a combination of virtual as well as in person and drive-in screenings. And I did like that freedom that the virtual catalog offered, because of the fact that there were some screenings that, for one reason or another, I wasn't able to get to. And so I was able to just go online, thankfully, for some of those movies and check them out. And I do like that flexibility. And it's funny, I was actually talking to Cameron McAllister, who's one of the directors of the Atlanta Film Festival.
Right.
And he's also a fellow Georgia Film Critics Association
Right.
member. And we were talking about that, and one of the things he said, and I agree with him, where I really don't think that there's festivals are really going to be able to get rid of the virtual access after everything is said and done with the pandemic and we're back to a relative normalcy. I really would have a hard time. I'm sure some film festivals will try to do it in the respective exclusivity, but I think the smart ones are going to realize that that is such a boon for them to be able to offer that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that the issue that you'll probably get into is, if a film has distribution, those distributors are kind of restricting how it can be accessed to protect their investment. And so I think what you're going to find is that you will have the broadest slate of movies will be available in person at a theater, because
Mm-hmm.
that can limit kind of its exposure. It's limited to that number of ticket holders, and that's it.
Yeah,
And then I think you have others where, they're either looking for distribution, or their distributors will allow them to go ahead and put it online, even though it might be a future VOD title, a future streaming title, something like that. And so I think what you'll find is it'll be kind of like tiers. If you go in person,
yeah,
you got the widest selection. And then, you can have maybe some kind of a blended pass where you go in person some and see other stuff some. And then maybe they'll actually be able to have the virtual pass, but the selection might be a little bit limited, because, the piracy concerns that distributors have, and things like that. They just, sometimes will restrict whether or not something can show online if it's going to be a future VOD or streaming title. But yeah, I think the pandemic. If you want to give it a silver lining, I'm reluctant to say COVID was good for anything, but
mm-hmm.
it's the fact that I think these folks are finding out that it's actually a viable commercial model. I mean, I think they're realizing that there's certainly an audience out there that would be happy to buy the online pass who might not be able to afford to make an entire vacation out of it and fly somewhere and stay in a hotel and do
Mhm.
all of those things. So yeah, I agree. I hope that that a virtual element is here to stay.
Yeah. Yeah, and and I do like the idea of I think it's gonna be good for it's good for both obviously the film festivals because they get extra revenue from people who are watching at home, but they
Right,
also the filmmakers it's a boon for them too because of the fact that it's more access to their movies and more
right.
people with the possibility of talking about their movies. And it's just one of those things where that it's going to be interesting to see. I'm sure that there's I would I feel like the release at this point the release paradigm of just theatrical is pretty much it's going to be hard to sustain that, I think, going forward. And I think the same thing is going to be the case with film festivals. I mean, again, I'm sure some of them are going to try. I think Cannes is going to be completely in person, which I have no idea how
Yeah,
that's going to work, but
yeah.
it's again, I can see it for those ones, but for something like Atlanta, for something like Fantasia Fest, and even like it'd be interesting to see Fantastic Fest do that this year too.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it was, it was interesting that last year, and it's probably the rights kind of issues that I was talking about, is
mhm,
that Fantastic Fest kind of got caught in between. It was like
yeah,
you had festivals early in the year that just weren't ready to go online. They thought they were going to be in person, and the next thing you
mhm,
know, they're just having to cancel outright. Like South by Southwest last year in 2020, just had to cancel outright because they weren't geared up to do anything online because they were canceling on a moment's notice. Fantastic Fest, it's kind of like I don't know. Occasionally, I'm guilty of using sports analogies, but when people talk about kind of a in between hop, they
yeah,
had just enough time to kind of think about doing it virtually, but not really enough time to put a slate together to attract people that way. And so they just kind of, in a way, punted and just said, we're not really set up for this. And then this year they're hoping to be, in person. I don't have any information as to whether or not they're going to do a virtual element to it or
mhm,
not. But as of right now, they're claiming it'll be September 23rd to September 30th. They're in Austin as usual. But it was one of those things that if you were later in the festival cycle, you had a
mhm,
chance to work with apps, work with platforms,
yeah,
work with folks to help you get something out there and have a virtual presence. But I remember I said that I was at the True False Film Festival last year, and I told you this little story before we logged on. There was a row of critics behind me. The True False Fest last year was the first weekend in March, and so that was
mhm,
just when all the COVID news was starting to break. And there were some seasoned film critics sitting behind me. And in essence, I heard them say, holy crap, South by just got canceled. And I remember thinking, wow, really? Over this? Because I mean, we've had bird flu and SARS and all
yeah,
this stuff that didn't amount to much. And so I think everybody was a skeptic initially. And so literally, I went to the True False Festival last March and then everything ended. I mean, everything got canceled, just one domino knocking over the next as COVID became a very real thing. It couldn't be dismissed like some of those other minor scares that we've had in the past. And
right,
so folks that had 6, 8, 9 months to plan their excuse me, their festival excuse me, got a virtual presence while other festivals weren't able to. Spend too much time talking, I guess. Got a frog in my throat there. But so so it is interesting though now that that virtual has become, I don't know that I would say expected, but certainly enjoyed by a lot of people.
yeah.
That I'm hoping it's here to stay.
Hmm. One of the things I've noticed over the past few years in covering the variety of film festivals that I've been able to do, whether it's the Atlanta Film Festival, Women in Horror Film Festival, which is now known as the Renegade Film Festival in Marietta, and Fantasia Fest, and then Sundance, is that it feels like every film festival almost has its own personality to a certain extent. And as you've covered film festivals over the years, have you noticed that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I marvel at the curation of some of the film festivals. Fantasia out of Montreal that you're referring to, uh, you know, another sports term, they got a deep bench. I mean, I'm telling you,
Mm-hmm.
they have just an amazing team there that puts together a fantastic lineup of films. And they do a great job with Asian cinema. I notice every
Yeah.
year some of my favorite films are from the Fantasia lineup, and films out of Korea, films out of Japan. Um, and then Fantastic Fest, it's interesting. A lot of people think that Fantasia and Fantastic Fest are very similar. And I guess what I would say is they're very similar in the sense that they just have absolutely excellent curation
Mm-hmm.
at both of those festivals, and they both do a great job with international cinema. But yeah, I find the personality of those festivals to be different, which is great because you don't want to, I mean, Fantastic Fest doesn't want to be Fantasia South, and
Yeah.
Fantasia doesn't want to be Fantastic Fest North. They want to be distinct festivals, and for two festivals that really emphasize genre films, good foreign genre films, they do a great job of bringing lineups that really just, I'm assuming only by kind of a fluke, really overlap with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And so they do a great job. And then, there are a lot of regional film festivals that do a really nice job. And one of the things that's fun about those regional festivals is how accessible everybody is.
Yeah.
I mean, so many people that you can meet. And when I say meet, I don't mean you and me who have press credentials and stuff like that. I mean, anybody,
Mm-hmm.
I remember Adam Green, Joe Lynch, Robert Cargill, a lot of people that came to the various Chattanooga film festivals. And, they'd just be
Mm-hmm.
hanging out outside the theater, hanging out in the lobby.
Yeah.
And, you could talk to them about their films. They'd sign stuff. You have this accessibility at some of those regional festivals that sometimes at the really big festivals you don't. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's one thing that I would recommend to just audience members, to viewers, to people who aren't press, is if you get a chance to go to a Knoxville Film Festival or a Chattanooga Film Festival, or wherever, all Kansas City, I mean, all the different places that have regional festivals. It's a great way to actually get to meet the filmmakers.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, you don't know who you're meeting as far as where they're headed.
Mm-hmm.
Because like the very first True False Film Festival that I went to, which Columbia, Missouri, is about half the size of where I live. It's about 120,000 people. And somebody by the name of Chloe Zhao or Zhao
Mm-hmm.
was there with her film The Writer. And I got a chance to talk with her after a screening, not as a member of the press, but just walking up and saying hello and shaking her hand. And she just won best picture, best director, at the Oscars. So I mean, you never
Yeah.
know when you go to some of these regional film festivals, the kind of people that you're meeting. And by the way, the one little insidery thing that I always tell people is she pronounces her name in a way that rhymes with slaw. So she pronounces it
Okay.
Jaw, not Zhao.
Okay.
But anyway, those are just like little examples of ways that you don't have to go to Toronto, to Tribeca, to Sundance and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that to have a great festival experience and really get to meet a lot of interesting people and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. And last year when I covered the Women in Horror Film Festival was the last fully in person one that I did last year before the pandemic hit. Like they had Heather Langenkamp and Amanda Wiss there, and like
Hmm.
you would just see them in the theater lobby, just talking to fans, talking to filmmakers who had their films there, and the filmmakers that were so accessible. It was really a community, and it's like they were
Yep.
talking to fans. It wasn't just press. It wasn't just other people associated with the festival, and it was just really wonderful atmosphere. And I think that's one of the things that I certainly it's one of the things that I certainly missed when it came to like Fantasia Fest and Sundance, and especially because of the fact that there really wasn't that in person communication. I mean,
Right.
they
Sure.
did what they could to try
Right.
to foster some communication between everybody, but it's harder. And I mean, Fantasia Fest, I will say, did a great job with it. They set up a Discord channel that was just wonderful to be a part
Right.
of. But Sundance, like I just couldn't get into a lot of the things that Sundance was doing to try to get people to talk with each other about the movies. Like what I really did was a bunch of us who were covering it on from Twitter. We did a WhatsApp chat, and
Right.
that's how I did most of my communication with people. And yeah, it's that's the biggest challenge as far as virtual film festivals is how do you get I mean, yeah, it's one thing that somebody can go online immediately after the movie and talk about it,
Right.
but it's another thing to be able to tell somebody in person, hey, I really liked your film, I really appreciated your film, it was a terrific film. And that's the thing that's really missing from virtual film festivals that just cannot be replaced compared to in person.
Yeah, no, I agree. The like I can think of I guess it was the last time that I went to Fantastic Fest. So obviously not last year, but the year before, the Jeremy Gardner film After Midnight was
Mm-hmm.
playing at that festival, and Bria Grant is in that film. And so literally, I'm just walking through the lobby and bump right into her. And she said hello, and I introduced myself and everything. And so there's this great central moment in that film that is a single take, and it's
Yeah.
lengthy, and it's a conversation between the two of them. It's not a bunch of camera running around kind of single take. It's this dramatic scene between them filled with dialogue. And so I was like, how many times did you guys have to shoot that? And we were talking about it, and you just got this interaction that you're not going to find
Yeah.
at the huge festivals where I mean, some of those huge stars even have security details depending on
Mm-hmm.
which festival you're talking about going to. And so sometimes it's great. I wouldn't call Fantastic Fest a small regional film festival. It's a huge festival, but in general, one of the reasons to go to smaller regional film festivals, Nashville, Birmingham, stuff like that, is that accessibility. And yeah, and that's something that literally can't be replicated virtually. I
Yeah.
mean, they can do an online Q&A right after a film, which many of them do, and then they record it, and you can access it later if you're seeing the film later in the festival. You can ask a question to the moderator, but there's no telling if it'll actually get asked. But that rubbing shoulders, so to speak, with the people actually in the film, you're only going to get that by going.
Mm-hmm.
There was one film I went to, the film Overlord. I don't know if you saw
Okay.
and his last name is Asbeck, the guy who was in Game of Thrones, Perlu Asbeck, who plays one of the Nazis. But at the time, he was like one of the hottest television stars there was because he had a central role on Game of Thrones. Well,
Yeah.
they had a party after the Overlord screening that anybody attending the festival could go to. It wasn't
Mhm.
it wasn't, restricted to press or something like that. Anybody. And so we're all standing in there talking to John Boyega and Wyatt Russell, and everybody was flocking around the Game of Thrones guy and all that kind of stuff. And so, that's the kind of reason that you want to go back and
Mhm.
get there in person.
Yeah. What was, I mean, what, for you, what's the biggest difference between watching a movie in that environment, that film festival environment, versus watching it just at a regular screening or press screening, or really online just for review sake?
Sure. The thing about festivals is those are the Uber fans, and
Mhm.
those are the people who are just, you know usually in their own, whether it's within a genre or whether it's within film altogether. They're just basically kind of bigger cinephiles, it seems like.
Mhm.
When you talk with folks, and somebody drops a name of kind of an obscure film, the majority of people standing there have seen it. And
Yeah.
so that's what you or at least what I really like. I mean, among my friends, my non-film critic friends, I'm the movie nerd, I'm the film guy. And so whenever I ask them, hey, have you seen this? Most of the time the answer is, I've never even heard of it. I
Yeah.
mean, they got
Yeah.
jobs, they got kids. If they're lucky, they're squeezing in something on Netflix on the weekend, and they're busy folks and they don't have time to watch nearly the stuff that I watch because of the press work that I do. And so you kind of feel like you're this island. I'm like this
Mhm.
guy that everybody comes to me and says, hey, what should I go see? Is this worth watching? But I don't have anybody to get information from, or to
Yeah.
ask about certain obscure films and stuff like that. And so that's part of what you get to do at a film festival. And my wife, I think, even this many years in, doesn't understand it. I think she thinks, couldn't you just stay home and watch 6 movies in a day and go to bed exhausted and it'd be the same thing? And I said, well, think of it like, you can speak Portuguese and you love to do it, but there's nobody Portuguese in your town to talk with. So you're going to go to a convention filled with people who speak Portuguese.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what this is like. You get to spend a week, a weekend, however long you get to be there, with a lot of like-minded people, who have a lot of the same points of reference that you have. I mean, I think people think that film critics are these, know-it-all snobs and everything like that. And my reaction is, I don't want to be the smartest person in the room about film. I
Mhm.
want people to turn me on to stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's why I love going to festivals. Is somebody will be like, hey, have you ever seen this movie by this foreign filmmaker? And I'm like, I've never even heard of it. And so I sit there with the notes section of my phone out, jotting things down because I know I'll forget it, to be able to go home and see some stuff that I didn't know about. So it's
Mhm.
it's a really nice way to just kind of get turned on to some stuff that you may really like, that is a little niche of this huge industry that you just didn't know about.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most exciting things about film festivals just in general, is just discovering movies that you wouldn't have necessarily heard from, that don't necessarily play the multiplexes and don't
Yep.
get the big releases, because they're basically film festival films where it's like some of them are struggling for distribution, some of them haven't found it yet, and some of them just, some of them may, like, I've got films from I saw at the Atlanta Film Festival 2 years ago, and I don't know that they've ever been released in America, and it's a shame because of the
Yeah.
fact that I really love them. And
Yep.
it is exciting, though. I will admit, one of the things that is exciting about it is being able to be in the front of a conversation about a movie. And
Right.
it's great to be able to see, like, Fantasia Fest last year, being able to see some of these films that I saw at Fantasia Fest that are suddenly making their way to either video on demand or Shudder or other
Right.
streaming services and go, oh, hey, this is, I just saw this a few months
Right.
ago. It's
Yeah.
absolutely insane.
Paper
And
Tigers.
it's wonderful. Yeah, Paper Tigers is wonderful.
It's absolutely incredible, and it hits VOD tomorrow. It hits VOD
Yeah.
May 7th. So yeah, great example. I love that film. But no, you're right. I mean, that becomes, and I mean, once again, like I said, I'm not talking about press. I'm talking about regular fans. You know,
Mhm.
you'll have this opportunity of, you could see. I think I'm trying to remember if it was opening night film. I can't remember what it was. Knives Out played Fantastic Fest 2 years ago,
Yeah.
and you were going to get a
Mhm.
chance to see it 6 months ahead of time. But then the
Mhm.
question is, if it's playing opposite a film that doesn't have distribution that looks really good, then
Yeah.
what's your choice? Do I want to be 6 months ahead on the conversation for Knives Out, but I know it's going to play my local multiplex eventually?
Yeah.
Or do I want to see the film that, as you point out, 2, 3 years later still may not have distribution and may not ever get distribution? And
Mhm.
so and so I always go into film festival kind of planning, trying to do a blend of that. I mean, by nature, what you and I do, we've got to be on the front edge of at least some conversations, or we're not
Right.
doing our job. But at the same time, I'm also scouting out those films that may be really hard to find later. And
Mhm.
and I love, being a champion of a film. I think a lot of
Mhm.
people somehow think that we just love giving bad reviews and being snarky and raking things over the coals and stuff like that. And I hate that.
Yeah.
I love finding a movie that is just an unexpected just gem, something like Paper
Mhm.
Tigers, and then I will, anytime the subject comes up, I'll be like, you got to see that, you got to rent it, you need to buy it,
Mhm.
you need to find it, whatever. I love turning people on to stuff that they otherwise wouldn't know about.
No, you're absolutely right about that. And it's one of the things that I was fortunate about 15 years ago to start getting filmmakers to I'm in independent blog, and I'm not one of the big names on it as far as, but 15 years ago, just filmmakers and film producers, they were like, hey, I mean, are you interested in reviewing my film? And it's like, sure, go ahead, send over a screener. And it's like, I was at the point where it's like, you know what, this could be interesting. And like 15 years later, I still have filmmakers doing it, and it's been completely rewarding because a lot of the filmmakers that are doing it are filmmakers who you would normally see their films on the festival circuit.
Right.
And I love being able to recommend some of those movies, and especially a movie that I love from those filmmakers. And especially if they do get distribution, it's like I will promote that. Like I will go, hey, you know what? This film's coming out. I saw it a few years ago. It's wonderful. And it's been great to be able to get to know those filmmakers. And like you said earlier, it's like you never know who you're going to meet on their way up.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely, and it's a lot of fun, doing that, and so that's one of the joys of going to a film festival is you may get in on the ground floor with the next big filmmaker and actually say, hey, I
Mhm.
remember, however many years ago when I got a chance to actually speak with that person and get a chance to meet them. And a lot of film festivals, there are places kind of there on site where people are eating. There are places on site like a bar right next door.
Mhm.
And so, when are you going to hang out and have a drink with, somebody who's made, well, I think of like Macon Blair.
Mhm.
He was the lead in Blue Ruin, the Jeremy Saulnier film,
Mhm.
and he also made a movie. Oh, what is that film about? I don't feel at home in this world anymore. It's a crime
Oh,
film
okay.
on
Yeah.
Netflix.
Yeah.
I always
Yeah.
get it confused because the title is almost the title of a Woody Guthrie song, and so I always say it wrong. But literally, he's sitting in the bar next door to the theater, just wearing a trucker hat and a t-shirt. And I walked in and I recognized him and I was like, dude, I absolutely love I don't feel at home in this world anymore. And he was like, oh, it's, so kind of you. Thank you. And we sat down and talked about kind of the comedic tone of the film and how brilliantly written I thought it was and all that kind of stuff. And it's just, where else are you going to be that you're going to bump into some guy whose movies you love while he's sitting in a bar?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
so and so that is obviously what the live experience will always have over the virtual experience. But you got to bear in mind that this stuff can get expensive. I mean, if you're all the way across country from the festival and you got to fly there and you got to stay in a hotel for a week and you got to have meals and then you got your passes on top of that. I mean, for most folks, it's, maybe a 1-2 festivals in a year kind of experience.
Yeah.
If you have to do it that way. And so I think that's the nice thing about the virtual aspect of it is, I hate the thought that film festival going would mostly just be somehow elitist. Like,
Yeah.
if you have the wallet for it, you can go and enjoy this experience, but otherwise you're just out of luck. And so I really like that the virtual levels the playing field. And, for a much, much lesser price, you could get access to the majority of the films and watch them from home. And I think it leads to a much more interesting conversation about the movies when you have people of, all financial capabilities who can actually get to see them.
Yeah. No, and that's absolutely true. And I think that's, that was what was interesting about, I mean, Sundance was so weird this year, not only because of the fact that it was virtual, but because of the fact that it was also a sort of launching point for some Oscar campaigns too, because of the fact that the Academy pushed back the awards season 2 months to our, and honestly kind of got what they deserved with that award ceremony. That was just absolutely ridiculous. But it was yeah, the conversation was way too long this year. I just couldn't even handle it. I don't even remember how we possibly survived when it was just at the end of March. I have no idea how we did that, but no, it like this year was so weird because you had Judas and the Black Messiah screen there, Land, which I consider a movie from this year. I guess they were banking on possibly being a late one, and then you're going to have movies like Coda and Mass come out of that festival, and they're going to be part of next year's conversation. And
exactly.
This year was just so weird for Sundance, but it was one of those things where it's like being able to access those movies too. And I mean, this is one of the good things about the streaming boom that we've sort of seen in the past year, where it's like these movies have been able to be more accessible quicker to people to see them. And I mean, that is one of the good things, but at the same time, it's like if you're not a film fan, I mean, you're not really paying attention to Sundance. How you usually hear about that movie is, oh, hey, it got sold for so and so money, and then 6 months later it comes out, and you don't really get that with the streaming film festival and what Sundance ended up doing this year.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's kind of like some people hold them back, thinking that it'll be a bigger contender for awards the next year. You just don't know for sure what the release schedule will be like coming out of those festivals. Like, I'm trying to remember, I saw the Australian crime film The Dry, and I'm trying to remember if that was South by. I can't remember. It was a very recent festival, and now I'm blanking on which one it was. And it will be out on VOD the 21st of this month.
Yeah.
So, it seemed like it played a festival and then boom, it's going to be out, on VOD just, a month later or what have you. And so, I mean, each film is kind of its own little distribution story. And
Mhm.
so some things you can see at a festival and won't see them for years. And there's a running string. There's a group on Facebook called Fantastic Fiends. And that is a page for folks who are lovers of Fantastic Fest and go all the time. And somebody on there, if I could cite their name, I would to give them credit, but I can't remember, has virtually a running spreadsheet of what played at Fantastic Fest for probably the last 10 years and the ones that still don't have distribution. That like you
Yeah.
either saw it then or you didn't see it. And so it's, each film has kind of its own little journey through the process. And so one nice thing about a festival like that is you'll get a chance to see some stuff that will undoubtedly disappear from the landscape for a good little while.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a shame, and it really is because of the fact that. But I love the fact that Paper Tigers is coming out, and I mean, Shutter's getting Friberry, which is another one from Fantasia Fest that is just absolutely bonkers. If you're a fan of just really weird sci-fi dark comedy like Friberry, I can't recommend it enough. It was just a lot of crazy fun to watch that. And Paper Tigers is one of those. And the thing is, it's like Paper Tigers, you could imagine in a different year, like that being a genuine like audience hit.
Oh
Like
yeah,
people would love that in theaters. That would have been
yeah,
awesome to watch in theaters.
I agree.
And it was a shame to be able to only really be able to see it online for the first time in Fantasia Fest. But yeah, and that it is nice to be able to point to those movies, but it is also a bit sad to see some of those movies that just don't catch on for some reason, don't get distribution. And yeah, I mean, I know what you mean about I actually just watched the Atlanta Film Festival, and yeah, it's coming out in a couple weeks. So it's interesting to see which movies. I mean, it's also tends to be like sort of the bigger studios. Like, I mean, Grand Focus and IFC are not like big studios in the sense of Warner Brothers or other studios, but they're still bigger studios and bigger distribution points than some of the other ones that you
Sure.
see picking up film festival movies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I look at the things that are coming out. I have my little list jotted down over here that I perpetually keep on my desk. And Writers of Justice, the Mads Mikkelsen revenge thriller that has really this kind of just odd Scandinavian sense of humor running through it. It's just fantastic. I saw that at a festival. It hits VOD on the 14th. Then there was The Dry, Paper Tigers. I mean, a lot of stuff is coming around, but it is strange that I'll put out like my top 20 list for the year, and a batch of them won't come out where everybody else can see them until
Yeah.
the next year. But by the same token, I don't have the patience to track all of that. And so if I saw it within the given year, then it's a candidate to be on my list.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I think it's kind of like everything else with the internet. I mean, it brings good stuff and it brings bad stuff. I know that filmmakers are just understandably petrified of piracy. I
Mhm.
understand their desire to limit. I mean, like I had, I saw the question a lot during some of these festivals. Why are they limiting the number of quote virtual tickets to a
Right.
given thing? I mean, can't I mean, hell, it's out there online. Can't everybody just watch it? And the answer is, I mean, the more people that you allow, the more likelihood there's going to be a bad person out there who decides to try to
Mhm.
pirate the thing. And then their distributors don't want, everybody who might rent or buy the movie to see it at a festival and not later buy or rent the movie. And so, a lot of the stuff is not the fault of the artists or the
Mhm.
film companies or what have you, and just wanting to, protect their commodity.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly it is certainly understandable that that's the case. I mean, that's gonna be one of the challenges as streaming and video on demand always just becomes more of an option for studios and then film festivals as well. I mean, that's always going to be the challenge. And I think for from what I've seen, I mean, I think the virtual aspect. I mean, we talked about earlier. The virtual aspect of film festivals is great. It's certainly advantageous for the film festival to be able to say, hey, you know what, you can watch this. You don't even have to leave your home to watch this, and it especially if you're not going to be in town. But at the same time, yeah, it's also one of those moves where that obviously you have are giving a certain degree of trust to the viewer to do the right thing by the film festival as well as the filmmaker.
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. I have to admit, while you were talking, I was looking at your little furry companion there beside you. Is that a tuxedo cat? I couldn't quite tell.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, she's got a little bit of a she's got like a little bit of a diamond
Gotcha.
on her chest. So
Well, I'm a cat person as well, so I was admiring your animals that were wandering around there. But yeah,
yeah,
one just hopped up on the sofa back there.
I
Uh,
yeah I see
but
that.
but yeah, it's just it's going to be, it's going to continue to evolve. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to say that what the landscape looks like right now is probably not what it will look like even a year from now. Models for delivering, I hate calling stuff content because I think
Yeah.
it just belittles it, but I'll just say generically, methods for delivering content are always gonna evolve with the times. And really, the one thing that kind of hadn't was film festivals. I mean, you would have thought that there would be a virtual element to film festivals before just last year.
Hmm.
And the bottom line was no, it was always an in-person, keep it close to your vest kind of industry, and you either came in person or you missed out.
Yeah.
And so it's actually a recent development that they have this virtual access, and so it'll be interesting to see how many places take it away versus how
Mhm.
many people make it at least a small component of their festival moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I like I said, I mean, I think the smart ones are going to realize that it's just such an important part of the experience now, and it gives you so much more access to such a larger audience, and that I just think that it's going to be hard for some of the bigger ones to get rid of it if they try to. Like I can almost see. I mean, I can almost see Sundance trying to, but I have a hard time believing that they're going to be able to.
Right. Yeah. And I think what you're going to see is what I said at the very beginning, and in case anybody missed that part, is the slate. I think will be different. I think there will be films that will be in the virtual catalog and accessible to people who choose to uh, uh, experience a film festival that way. And then you'll have the broadest selection, obviously, in person. And so I think, hopefully, I
Mm.
think rather than just eliminating the virtual altogether, I hope that it will be, they will incentivize coming in person, of course, with the ability to meet the stars, meet the filmmakers, participate in Q&As, things like
Mm.
that. But that they'll keep, some virtual element in place for folks who just can't otherwise fit it in,
Yeah.
and at least attend, part of a festival, if nothing else, virtually, if you can't manage to get there.
Yeah, and to wrap it up, and it was great to talk to Scott about this subject. I would just say, if you're a fan of films, if you're a fan of movies, look in your, look online for a local film festival, and I would suggest going for at least a day. I
Yeah.
mean, preferably, maybe more if you want to, but I mean, if you go to for a day, chances are you'll be hooked. I mean, I would,
Yeah.
and the thing is, it's like, don't necessarily limit it just because of the fact that you've heard of a movie. Like, check out the short film blocks. There's a lot of great movies that
Oh,
short films and
that's
filmmakers that come out of there.
that's a great point. I can't believe it. I actually
Yeah.
helped program 3 film festivals that were exclusively short films.
Yeah.
And I wasn't the one who brought that up. So great point there. Is we seem to be talking features. But yeah, the short film blocks at film festivals are just a blast. And especially if it's the really established festivals, I mean, it's going to be the best of the best when it comes to short films at those festivals. And there's some real knockouts out there in the short films blocks. And and I look at this from a standpoint of fan and critic, because I am both. The one thing I am not is a filmmaker. And so one other thing to point out is, if any filmmakers are watching this, it's a great way to meet people who want to get projects off the ground. And so, you show up at the film festival, a few other locals that you may not have even known are into that show up at the film festival. And the next thing you know, you're hatching your plan to go film your own short film together. Because you met somebody who's a DP, and you met somebody who knows how to do the sound or what have you. And I mean, I know people who've kind of crewed up to make their own short film at a festival. And you're absolutely right when you talk about at least what we're headed toward, the pre-COVID area, or rather the pre-COVID era, that hopefully we're going to make our way back to. I mean, there are film festivals in the plural every weekend across this country. And so, I mean, in anywhere from, like I said, Birmingham, Knoxville, Nashville, the Salem Film Festival, Portland, all of these places. And so there will be something within driving distance of anybody who's watching this at some point that you could go to at hopefully, a fairly minimal expense. I mean, you'd be able to drive there, go attend for a day, and it not break the bank.
Yeah, and I can't believe it took us this long to mention short films as well. Like, short film blocks are a lot of fun to experience, because even if you see one that you're not as high on, chances are the next one
exactly
could be just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, just sit tight for 8 or 10 minutes and it's going to change. It's like people joking about weather in certain parts of the country. Wait about 10 minutes and it'll change. Well, same thing with short films. You attend an hour-long block of short films, and there won't be too much downtime within those blocks. So yeah, that's also something. And honestly, that is part of the experience that you almost can't replicate anywhere else. I mean, where do you go online to say, show me the best short films that are out there right now? It's they're scattered to the four winds on online, and usually well after their festival runs and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely, if you decide to go to a festival, book yourself a shorts block or two. You'll be happy you did.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's time for us to wrap up. Before Scott, thank you very much for joining me once again. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I do basically video reviews for WRBL.com. The segment is called The Screen Scene. All of my work essentially is compiled at mscottphillips.com. My first name is Michael. And so Michael Phillips is the film critic for the Chicago Tribune. So I learned after signing up for a couple of film festivals as Michael Phillips, don't do that, because they're going to be disappointed when I show up instead of the esteemed critic for the Chicago Tribune. So I'm not doing some lofty F. Scott Fitzgerald kind of thing. I just decided to make it clear I go by my middle name. So I use M. Scott Phillips. So you can find my work at mscottphillips.com. And then I'm on Twitter at mscott_Phillips.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Yeah,
I
it was a
really
lot of
enjoyed
fun.
this conversation. And that's it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema Movie Chat. Join us on Monday nights, where I should be talking to a filmmaker about his experiences at film festivals, what it's like to have your film at a film festival, and what it's like to just watch a film festival. And I hope you enjoyed that conversation, and I hope you join us again at the Sonic Cinema Movie Chat on Twitch. My name is Brian Scuttle. My main hub is www.sonic-cinema.com. Thank you very much.